So you want to be a spellsword? Well, pals, you've come to the right gal. I love being a spellsword. What's cooler than dueling with a rapier while flinging spells with your offhand? Skyrim, Elden Ring, Pathfinder. If a game offers that choice, that's my build. In this video, we'll be covering two different kinds of spellswords in Pathfinder. Those who can use a weapon attack to resolve a spell, which I call Spellstrikers, and those who can alternate between weapon attacks and spells, which I call mixers, because they mix it up. As always, these videos are about highlighting your options to help you find the right playstyle, so I won't be going into specific builds or trying to min-max for anything other than fun. If you have a particular build you enjoy, though, feel free to share it in the comments below. You never know if you might inspire someone. First of all, through the power of archetyping, anything is possible, so jot that down. You can mix basically any martial with any spellcaster and have a custom spellsword hot to go. If you want a breakdown of those options, see my previous video, which covers every archetype in the game. But if you don't want to have to make your own spellsword from scratch, you're in luck. Pathfinder's base classes also offer you a lot of options. So let's talk about Spellstrikers. The Magus is what most people think of as the Pathfinder spellsword option. They have an ability called Spellstrike, where you can both cast a spell and do a strike. Hence, Spellstrike. It do what it say it do. And that's a lot for only 2 actions, and you're not dealing with any multiple attack penalty on either of those. That means the Magus will hit often and hit hard, combining the damage of a cantrip or spell with their normal weapon damage. They can use Spellstrike with any cantrip or spell, so the Magus will consistently trigger enemy weaknesses as well. The subclasses for Magus are where you pick your fighting style. You can use a bow, any 1- or 2-handed melee weapon, or you can specialize in shields. Each also gives you a focus spell to use with that weapon of choice, and unique bonuses for when you're in your arcane stance, like temporary HP every round or extra damage, which might be a lot for some players to keep track of. You've got focus spells, regular spells, stances, and whether or not your spell strike is charged. While the Magus is one of the most popular classes in all of Pathfinder, it might not be right for players who would feel overwhelmed by resource management. Luckily, the Magus isn't the only one who has a built-in Stabracadabra. Yep, the Warpriest Cleric is also a Spellstriker. You might never have thought of it this way, but Channel Smite is basically the same as a Spellstrike, only limited to heal and harm spells. That's not so bad, considering you get 4 to 5 extra spell slots just for those spells. That's right, at level 1, you can have 6 spell slots. To top that off, Channel Smite doesn't require you to recharge it like a Magus would. As you level up, there are feats you can grab to dial up the spell swordiness even more. For example, Restorative Strike will let you heal yourself, smack a foe, and heal a nearby ally for only 2 actions and 1 spell slot. The Warpriest Cleric is a powerhouse in melee too. You have medium armor and proficiency in your deity's favorite weapon, which can basically be any weapon in the game if you pick the right god for it. And if you want to be very tanky with loads of spells to burn in a melee-oriented spell sword, then Warpriest Cleric is a great choice. But no matter whether you go healing or harming font, your effectiveness will vary depending on if you're fighting living or undead creatures. If your party is living and you're fighting undead, you'll basically have no use for harm spells during that fight, so choose wisely. Clerics come with a lot of flavor already baked into them. You're tied to a god and the divine spell list, you're more tanky than damage-oriented, and your smites only damage either the undead or the living, but not both. That might not fit with what you have in mind for your character. And hey, maybe you just want to be less of a holy blade and more of an elemental warrior, which leads me to the first of the mixers, the Kineticist. You might not think of a Kineticist as a spell sword, but it has a surprisingly spell sword playstyle. As a Kineticist, you'll be alternating between attack rolls for your impulse blast and save-based abilities. And that sounds like a spell sword to me. You pick 1 or 2 elements to start with and can either specialize in those or continue expanding until you've mastered all of the elements. If this is giving you Avatar vibes, you are totally correct. While all elements work well for dex builds, players interested in strength-based melee builds should consider wood and earth. Both offer you armor options you don't get normally. I would stay away from metal's armor feat though. It breaks when an enemy crits you. And I don't know about you, but right after being crit is the last time I'd like a wardrobe malfunction. For even more spell-sorty flavor, grab the Weapon Infusion class feat, which lets you turn your elemental blast into literal summoned weapons, like a glaive made of fire, or a hammer made of ice, or a sword made of metal. Okay, that last one doesn't sound as cool when you think about it, but you literally just summoned it out of nothing, so give yourself some credit. Kineticist abilities don't run out either. They don't use spell slots or focus points or resources of any kind. As such, your abilities will never be as strong as a spell at the same level, but you know what does more damage than one fire spell? Spamming a fire impulse every single round until your foes are nice and crispy. And you're not limited to just damage. Depending on your elements, you can heal, block damage to your allies, and more. This class can really be customized to any playstyle you're looking for and is fairly straightforward to play, which is never a bad thing. But what if you want to be less metal bender and more heavy metal? Well, there's a bard subclass dedicated to being a spellsword, the Warrior Muse. You gain a single action cantrip that gives a +1 to your whole party's attack rolls, damage rolls, and saves against fear effects. So while you might only be trained in martial weapons at level 1, you can spend one action to help close the gap between yourself and a fighter of the same level, and do the same for your whole party. You also get martial performance for free, which makes that +1 buff last an extra round when you hit with any strike, so melee or ranged. Your first turn will likely be casting this buff, striding in, and attacking in melee, or maybe making 2 ranged attacks. On your second turn, you can cast an occult spell for 2 actions, and get another attack off, and then alternate back and forth between those 2 turn patterns. You also gain access to some really fun feats, like Courageous Advance, Defensive Coordination, and Courageous Assault, that lets you spend an action on your turn to let an ally use the reaction to move, raise their shield, or attack a foe in their reach. If you're looking for a spellsword who's also one of the best supports in the game, give the bard a chance to strike a chord. There's also an honorable mention that I'd briefly like to cover, the Unified Magical Theory Wizard. It might not sound super gishy, but this wizard subclass gets a focus spell that lets them throw any melee weapon at an enemy, using their spellcasting modifiers instead of dex or strength. The only requirement is that they're trained in that weapon, which, with the right weapon familiarity feat, can be a powerful 2-handed weapon. But there's nothing quite like chucking a great sword at your foes. And since it's using your spell attack roll, you don't really care if your proficiency in that weapon never goes above trained. The reason I don't think it's super spell-swordy is that you can only do that once per combat until you get your second focus point, making your wizard feel much more like a spellcaster than a proper spell sword. I'm not saying that isn't fun. I love a wizard who can just yeet a warhammer. It just doesn't feel like a proper spell sword to me. And that, pals, is how to play a spell sword in Pathfinder 2e. I hope this video inspires you to open up Pathfinder and start on a new journey. I plan on covering spellcasters and marshals next, so keep an eye out for those videos. Before we go, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Ron the Rules Lawyer for giving me a shout out in his video on Rangers and Animal Companions. I bet everyone in my audience has already heard of him, but if not, he also makes great Pathfinder videos, and I highly recommend checking him out for his game analysis. I'll have a link in my description. Honestly, the whole Pathfinder community has been so supportive, and I'd like to pay it forward a little bit by recommending BadLuckGamer. His videos are great for getting sneak peeks at future Pathfinder content, as well as going more in-depth into archetypes and classes than I typically go into. Plus, he's always advocating for Pathfinder positivity to grow the community as a whole, and I can vibe with that. So check him out in the description below as well. As always, thanks for watching, and subscribe to pick me as your Pathfinder pal.
HOTTOGO, snap and clap and touch toes.